That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, I'm not going to lie. I think the buy low wide receivers this week are a lot more interesting and obtainable than the running backs. Y'all know the running backs was essentially go to a great team that disappointed, grab their starting running back, and let's move on. But no, the wide receiver is going to be a little bit nuanced. I'm going to be talking about some players that literally cost you nothing that you may be able to get off the waiver wire right now. And then I'm going to be talking about some of the elite guys near the end of the video. So, of course, make sure you stick around for that. But we have to give away some Fantasy Flock Network hats before we get into it. You know, every single time you go down there, drop a like, leave a comment on the video if you were subscribed. And we just hit 60,000 subscribers. So, of course, that's awesome. You actually get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. We give them away multiple videos. Not even going to be reading these. We got them coming out from IJR and Cash Trip. If you win that Fantasy Flock Network hat, just make sure you send me that email ASAP with your physical address so I can get you out that Fantasy Flock Network hat. And then lastly, of course, you can support the show. You can get your own Fantasy Flock Network hat by going and joining the Flock on Patreon. Over there on the Flock on Patreon, you should be able to find our up-to-date rest of season rankings. When you join, you get an in-depth podcast breaking down your own fantasy team. You get our dynasty rankings. You can get into a dynasty league with us. You get a Flock hat. You get in our group chat. I mean, there's so many things going over there on Patreon. And one quick note, of course, go join Underdog Fantasy. On Underdog Fantasy, you can find player props. You can get into drafts with us on the live streams. Y'all know we've been doing a ton of drafts on Underdog Fantasy during those live streams. And when you make your first deposit on Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FLOCK, you actually get that matched dollar for dollar up to $100. So, of course, make sure you take advantage of that. And, you know, it supports the channel. Nonetheless, let's go through. Let's dive into it. Let's start it off with the wide receiver that you may be able to get off the waiver wire, Van Jefferson. And here with Van Jefferson, I'm not going to lie. It's embarrassing that I did not include him on the waiver wire video. As soon as I recorded that video, I recorded it at like 2 a.m. on Sunday night. So I was like, I can't re-record this. I wish we could have got Van Jefferson on there because Van Jefferson is a player that based on just every opportunity he has had in Los Angeles by getting damn near every single snap in this offense, he's someone that if he is on your waiver wire, it's absurd. And I am saying this as someone that I don't want to say hated Van Jefferson coming into the season, but I hated Van Jefferson coming into the season. I mean, he was a wide receiver drafted in the 2020 class. I mean, the reason he was drafted in the second round of that 2020 class, if y'all remember back from a dynasty fantasy football context, I mean, he was actually drafted back in that second round, just given how he was NFL ready, how he was ready to step on a field right away. And even though this was a wide receiver that didn't have a great athletic profile, based on what he was going to be able to do right away for the Los Angeles Rams, a lot of people thought that this was someone that was worth the investment. Well, I didn't necessarily think that was true. I thought that with Van Jefferson going into year two, that if he didn't prove anything in year one when he was supposed to be this pro-ready wide receiver, I didn't want any part of him. I mean, you had this team going out and investing into Tutu Atwell in the second round in this year's draft class. They brought in Deshaun Jackson. Clearly, they had Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, who are going to be the wide receiver 1A and wide receiver 1B. At least we thought. I guess it's just Cooper Kupp, then a clip down to Robert Woods. Nonetheless, I mean, since then, you've had a couple things change here. I mean, Tutu Atwell doesn't show us anything, gets placed on the IR his rookie season. And also, Deshaun Jackson no longer with the team anymore. So yeah, you have a couple things that are changing the depth chart for Los Angeles. And also this offense clearly looks fantastic. And a big thing is, if we go over and look at the formation that you had every single play for this Los Angeles Rams offense, it was 11 personnel. Every single play, you got 3 wide receivers on the field. You have 1 tight end. And I mean, if we're looking at the snaps, of course, Van Jefferson is not going to be anything close to Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods with his production or his efficiency because he's not close to them from a talent perspective, but he is getting 75 snaps compared to their 78. Like, he is an every down player for this Los Angeles Rams offense. And yes, I mean, he wasn't that great this past week with his actual fantasy production, but keep in mind, this was a down week from this entire offense from the Los Angeles Rams. I'd imagine that you actually get this team producing at a much higher level going forward. So yeah, Van Jefferson was the wide receiver 49 this week. But if you overlook that, if we just look at the amount of opportunity that he has had in this offense, is a wide receiver that's had 46 targets. He's had 40 targets since week 3. So he is averaging essentially 7 targets a game in this Los Angeles Rams offense. And of course, that's trending in the positive direction. Like if we're looking at the first month of the season, I mean, it's 3 targets, 6 targets, 6 targets. Since then, 4, 7, 6, 7. I mean, clearly you can kind of draw a line exactly when Deshaun Jackson left this team, exactly when Van Jefferson became an every down player. And going forward, I know that, I mean, they have some tough matchups, like they get the 49ers this week, but honestly, I don't really care about the matchups for the Los Angeles Rams here based on what we have seen from this offense, even though that they just disappointed against the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to be pegging that this offense is going to be a top 5 passing offense rest of season with no hesitation. So yeah, I go through and I'm mainly just embarrassed, so we have to include him on the buy low video. I guess if you're playing in a dynasty format, you can go out there and try to buy him low, but mainly pick up Van Jefferson off the waiver wire. It's embarrassing I did not put him on that video. I feel very bad about it, so we're going to have to make sure we put that caveat out there. I'll make sure we get this video out to y'all before your waiver wires process so you can go and pick up Van Jefferson. And now let's go over to a wide receiver that did not play this week. He is past his bye. Also, someone that I didn't really like coming into the season. He was going in the 3rd round, and I was saying that he was one of the worst picks you could make in the 3rd round. Terry McLaurin. Now, let's go through and let's remember why we didn't really like that draft price of Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round. It's A, we weren't really believing that Ryan Fitzmagic was going to be able to maintain his status as a starting quarterback throughout the entire season based on what we've had for Ryan Fitzmagic as a decade. B, with Curtis Samuel, we were assuming that he was going to be the most target competition that you had ever had for Terry McLaurin in Washington. And yeah, Terry McLaurin was still going to be the wide receiver A. I mean, but at the same time, he maybe wasn't going to be seeing that 30% team target share. Well, I mean, Curtis Samuel, I don't think we have to worry about him at all. Even if he manages to get back to the football field for this Washington football team, I am not really going to be expecting that he can stay there. I'm not expecting at any point for him to be able to come out and take even 20% of the team target share for Washington. I think Terry McLaurin, based on what we have seen so far this season, he's had 76 targets through 8 weeks. That's a very safe role that he is going to have going forward. And what do you like about this offense? The fact that they're getting Ryan Fitzmagic back in there at quarterback very soon. So if you're going to go and you're going to look at the past month of production, like let's look at the past 4 weeks for Terry McLaurin. He actually had a bye, so we're going to be looking at weeks 5 through 9. Yeah, Terry McLaurin, disappointing performance after disappointing performance after disappointing performance. He has 3 double-digit games essentially over the past month here with Terry McLaurin on a per-game basis. He's been the wide receiver 39. You don't want to be betting on that, but what you do want to be betting on is the volume that has been there with this situation getting better at the same time. I know that the matchups going forward, not the best for Terry McLaurin, and I want to put that little asterisk out there, but if I'm going to be pulling him up in my rest of season rankings over there on Patreon, now I'm going to be looking at my rest of season rankings that we updated last week on Patreon. Of course, if you're part of the Patreon community, you should be able to see these updated probably by the time this video comes out. They will be updated on Tuesday. I'm recording this on Monday, so we're going to be working on this all night tonight before the live stream. But right now we have Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 12. Honestly, I think he's going to stay there. I mean, the grouping of wide receivers that we have in that same tier with Terry McLaurin, we have players like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, DK Metcalf. We're going to get to a couple of those names in just a second. But I think with McLaurin, based on the fact that he is getting to 10 targets, he has the exact workload that you were wanting in Washington. And on top of it, we should see more passing volume if they can transition back to Ryan Fitzmagic, hopefully in a week or two. I think it's probably a good time to buy McLaurin now because we know once you get people starting to talk about Washington bringing back Fitzmagic, then it's going to be a little too late. Now let's go over to a player that we called a sell high option about a month ago when everybody lost their goddamn mind, even though he was a clear sell high, Jamar Chase. Now, Jamar Chase, you have to list him as a buy low. Now, the production that he has had over the past 2 weeks, it has taken a dip, but that is, of course, what you would expect. I mean, when a wide receiver is going out there and averaging 20 yards per target in a single week, we know that's going to come down. We know that unless Jamar Chase is going to be better than peak Randy Moss, that he's not going to be able to keep those levels up. If you're looking at the volume that T. Higgins had, we would naturally assume, hey, T. Higgins, going to get better. Jamar Chase, maybe going to get a little bit worse. So we had a lot of pushback over there on Patreon when I ranked Jamar Chase as a low-end wide receiver 1 rest of season rather than a top 3 guy like I know you would find in any other rankings. But at this point, I think Jamar Chase, I mean, a lot of people are probably going to start to realize, oh, maybe he isn't that top 3 wide receiver rest of season, and they're going to be moving him down to their low-end wide receiver 1 range. I mean, pulling up our up-to-date rest of season rankings, we had Jamar Chase at wide receiver 9 coming into the week. We had him directly behind players like A.J. Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Jefferson, and I think at this point, I mean, he's still in that same tier. Nothing's changed at all for Jamar Chase. And I really want to be putting that out here and just saying that, yeah, he may have had a couple down weeks, but this is when you pounce. This is when you go and get your buy low opportunity. Because if we're looking at what he did in weeks 5, 6, and 7, this is the peak of Jamar Chase craziness hype when everybody had him as a top 3 wide receiver, which is completely in his range of outcomes. I mean, that's the ceiling for Jamar Chase. We've clearly seen that he has that level of upside, which is why I'm saying once his price falls to being maybe a mid to low end wide receiver 1, that's when we can go out there and target him. But the reason that we were having to avoid in weeks 5, 6, and 7 was this was a wide receiver, 10 targets, 160 receiving yards. That's 16 yards a target. And then in week 6, 6 targets, almost 100 receiving yards. That's, if my math is correct, about 15 yards a target right there in week 6. And week 7, 20 yards a target. You're not expecting that level of efficiency for any wide receiver to sustain. Now you're looking at the past 2 weeks here for Jamar Chase, and this has been a player that's cratered with his efficiency. And against the Jets, he had 9 targets, 32 receiving yards. That's not going to keep up. And then the next week against the Browns, 13 targets, 49 receiving yards. So, I mean, the opportunity is steady. It's just that efficiency is going to be volatile week to week. We talk about this all the time. So this is the perfect opportunity if you want to get in on Jamar Chase. Nothing has changed with this situation over the past month. You should not be any more worried. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, they're playing the exact same roles that they had about a month ago. It's just that Chase hasn't been that lucky with this efficiency. He's not been getting those 90-yard reception touchdowns. So I think you can go through and you can pick him up at probably a discounted price right now. Now let's go over to our next buy low candidate. And this is going to be just the most expensive player you're going to see ever on a buy low list. But Devonta Adams. Now with Adams, of course, you are paying that elite price tag. You're paying a very high price tag on Jamar Chase as well. It's a completely different situation than what we have with someone like Van Jefferson. But with Devonta Adams, just speaking of a buy window opening up at all, that's what we're looking for here. With these elite players, you're never getting 25% off their value. You're never going to go and say, hey, Devonta Adams, yeah, he was disappointing last week. Would you trade him at, say, the wide receiver 8 price? Can I go give you Darrell Henderson for Devonta Adams? Of course, that's never going to happen. It's that when these players disappoint, it's not that their value drastically dips. It's that they become obtainable in the first place. Because 9 out of 10 times, if you approach an owner on Devonta Adams to say, hey, man, what can I give you for Devonta Adams right now? They're going to say, why would I ever, go away. They're going to tell you to just leave because there's clearly no incentive for them to be moving off of Devonta Adams. Now, over the past month, I mean, with Devonta Adams, size points has been 19.5 against the Washington football team. Now, of course, for anybody paying attention, it's clear why this has happened. I mean, in week 9, I don't know if y'all heard, he played with Jordan Love. If anybody watched that game, which I will say, it is so sad now to watch the Kansas City Chiefs play. That used to be the best thing to watch any given week. Is just, even if you're not a Chiefs fan, just put on the Chiefs game and you know you're going to see some very fun football. It was sad to watch the Chiefs play the Packers and the Chiefs just not be able to move the ball down the field. Neither could the Packers with Jordan Love. Clearly, Aaron Rodgers is everything to this offense. And against the Cardinals in week 8, Devonta Adams had COVID. So yeah, you haven't had that top level production from Devonta Adams in quite a while. I'm not going to be overthinking this. I will say that his rest of season schedule is pretty tough. He has the Seahawks week 10. Not too worried about the Seahawks defense by any means, but we know the Seahawks aren't necessarily a great team to be going up against with any player because they're going to be drastically slowing down the game, and the amount of plays run per game is going to be a lot lower than what you would have in other contests. The Vikings week 11, we're fine with it. The Rams in week 12, of course, you would like to avoid Jalen Ramsey if we can. A bye week in week 13. Then we got the Bears, Ravens, Browns. So not good matchups for Devonta Adams. But nonetheless, this is a wide receiver that I think is going to be very impressive with his touchdown rate down the stretch, because we know that very rarely can you look at a player and say, this guy is going to have an average or above average touchdown rate at the minimum. I mean, the majority of the time, touchdown rate is not something you can project. I mean, you have to kind of actively avoid those players that are coming off unsustainable stretches with their touchdown rate. Like if they go through and they say have 40 targets and they have 5 touchdowns, you're like, okay, probably not going to continue Mike Williams at the beginning of the season. Whereas with Devonta Adams, this is one of those players that we have seen over a long duration with the red zone role that he has in Green Bay, that he's going to be scoring touchdowns at a much higher rate than pretty much any other wide receiver in the NFL. He's had damn near 90 targets this season and 3 touchdowns. I promise you, Devonta Adams, we're going to get some multi-touchdown games coming very soon. You're not getting a super cheap price on him, but the fact that you can trade for him to begin with, I think we definitely have to at least be sending out an offer or two. Now, let's go with our next wide receiver. And honestly, we're going to include a tight end, maybe in a couple players, but I think that this guy is just very simple. Not much to say here. CeeDee Lamb. Now, y'all know we called Amari Cooper a sell high in the last video because Amari Cooper came out and he balled out on prime time television against the Minnesota Vikings, had the touchdown winning reception. And of course, that's always going to be just drastically skewing how you're viewing a given player. And with CeeDee Lamb this past week, obviously the storyline is this Dallas Cowboys offense just couldn't move the ball down the field. But the underlying numbers for CeeDee Lamb, fantastic. He had the air yards. He had the targets to begin with. And yeah, the efficiency wasn't necessarily there, but just going back to what we know as CeeDee Lamb based on his historical rates, based on the prospect that he was coming into the NFL, the talent profile that we assume that he has, I think with CeeDee Lamb, this is a very easy wide receiver to go through and bet on the bounce back with. He's had 28 targets over the past 3 weeks. So yeah, he only has 4.3 points this week. I mean, if you're going to be looking at Amari Cooper, on the other hand, with Amari Cooper, not necessarily that great either. He has 5.7, but with Amari Cooper, I mean, he has 5 targets compared to CeeDee Lamb's 9. If you're going to be looking at the amount of plays run, I mean, CeeDee Lamb got up to 44 snaps in this game. I'll say a lot of this was garbage time. You're going to see that Cedric Wilson had more snaps than both CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. We can't be reading into that too much, but clearly Lamb was the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Amari Cooper so far this season has had 61 targets in Dallas, and a lot of that has come in 1 or 2 games. And CeeDee Lamb, on the other hand, he has actually had 66 targets, and I think you're going to get Michael Gallup playing on the outside alongside Amari Cooper, and then possibly CeeDee Lamb moving into the slot when you have Michael Gallup coming back in. And I would love CeeDee Lamb in the slot. Obviously, you have a lot of that Dalton Schultz production in that area of the football field right now. I think that could open up a ton for CeeDee Lamb. Now, I don't know if we should even cover this next wide receiver or we should just move to some tight ends. You know what? Let's do it. I want to put an asterisk on this because, of course, it's going to depend with how much in the loop your league mates are. But Antonio Brown, at least let's go send some offers. Because with Antonio Brown, this is a player that I'd imagine he is going to be coming back this week against the Washington football team. He missed the past 2 weeks against the Bears and the Saints. Then he was on bye. So I think at this point, knowing that they decided not to put him on the IR, that we can assume that Antonio Brown will be back with that ankle injury, especially with this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team taking that loss right beforehand. And y'all know that, I mean, I loved Godwin coming into the season. I was all about drafting Chris Godwin. We had him ranked in the 3rd round when his ADP was in the 5th round. Now, at the same time, if we can just take a step back, we can look at what this offense has been when you've had both Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin playing together at the same time. I mean, Antonio Brown is right there. It's a wide receiver 1A, wide receiver 1B type situation. If I'm looking at my rest of season rankings, of course, we're going to update these on Patreon. You should be able to see them if you're a part of the Patreon community today at the latest. But these are the ones last week. We had Chris Godwin at wide receiver 16, Antonio Brown at wide receiver 19. I think that with AB here, this is someone that's going to be neck and neck with Godwin. A lot of people are just assuming that Godwin is the wide receiver 1 yet again, just because, I mean, Godwin's crushed the past 2 weeks, but that's kind of what you would expect. I mean, if Chris Godwin was removed from this offense, we would be expecting that Antonio Brown would become a top 5 wide receiver. That's just how it works whenever you know that Tampa is going to have all that production and it's being divided between all these players. And I think with Antonio Brown coming back in, this is a wide receiver that was the wide receiver 5 on a points per game basis. You're not going to be expecting that level of production, but over the past 3 weeks, 11 targets, 7 receptions, 63 receiving yards, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 124 receiving yards, 13 targets, 9 receptions, 93 receiving yards. He's had 3 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks as well. I mean, Godwin, yeah, Chris Godwin looks fantastic. Trust me, I love Godwin, looking great. He's had 11 and 12 targets over the past 2 weeks. But if we're going to go through and look at what he had when you had Antonio Brown playing, you had 5 targets, 11 targets, 5 targets. So Godwin was averaging 7 targets a game rather than 10 plus. I'm going to be assuming that Antonio Brown goes back into that same role. Antonio Brown, not going to have him ranked as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver 1. I think that we're probably going to have him just they're all neck and neck. I think it's almost pick your poison when you're talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers. We'll probably have Antonio Brown behind the others just because the ankle injury, and we don't necessarily have to be taking the risk with that if we can just pivot over to the other options for free. And yeah, we will go through, we'll talk about a tight end here because, I think that we have to cover him. We're going to be talking about him a lot in the live streams. Y'all know we've been talking about him a lot since the Zach Ertz trade. Let's bring up Dallas Goedert. Now, Dallas Goedert, disappointing week this past week. He comes out only 3 receptions, 43 receiving yards. And this entire Philadelphia Eagles passing offense, not great. You had Jalen Hurts coming out, and with Jalen Hurts, he definitely did limit what you're going to see with the passing volume in Philadelphia, which is something I want to admit. When you have one of those rushing quarterbacks, it's not necessarily going to be a situation where we can just expect it to be like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But nonetheless, if we're going to be going through and tracking the amount of snaps and the amount of routes run that you have for Dallas Goedert out there yet again, 53 out of 57 snaps. He is crushing his career high in snap rates since you've had Zach Ertz leaving this offense. He comes out, he is tied for the team lead in targets yet again, comes out, gets 6 targets, and this offense runs 20 routes compared to Smith's 22. They're neck and neck here. Clearly, Dallas Goedert's getting used as a receiving tight end. He's running just as many routes as Devonta Smith. And if we're going to be trying to project this going forward, I think there's nothing that we should be changing. With Dallas Goedert here, he's averaged 6 targets over the past 3 weeks since you had Zach Ertz getting traded over to Arizona. If we're going to be looking at what he had the first 5 weeks when you had Zach Ertz in this offense, let me do some quick math in my head here. That looks like 5, 10, 16, 19 targets through 5 weeks. He's averaging about 4 targets a game. He is pretty much 1.5x that. I think that you want to be going through betting on Dallas Goedert, hoping that this team skews a little bit more with the pass as they were doing previously this season, because I think that would really help Dallas Goedert if the passing volume did get an uptick. But yeah, nonetheless, I think you have to be trading for Dallas Goedert right now. And yeah, that's all I got for you. I really hope that y'all enjoyed this video. Please make sure you go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Just passed 60,000 subscribers on Sunday. So of course, thank you so much for everybody that's been supporting the channel. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Have a great day.